Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the world, the Cellarcast, episode 139. So, I've mentioned before my problems with my microwave, or the Oppenheimer box, as I call it. I forgot to give an update on the situation, in which I know everyone was just chomping at the bit to hear what's going on with Tigan's microwave. Well, update. As of, honestly, it's been a couple months now, the belt in the microwave has just totally broken. We haven't opened it up to actually see what's wrong, but basically what would happen is that I noticed that it wouldn't rotate, right? So if I just spun, when I saw that it wasn't rotating after I turned it on, I would open it up. I would open up the microwave, and then I would grab the plate with my hands, like the rotating plate part of it, and I would manually turn it like one full rotation, and I would feel a lot of like resistance, right? And then I would close it, hit start again, and it would do like a little it would struggle for a second, and then it would start turning like normal. And I did that for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then one day I went in to do that little fix again, and I tried to turn the plate, and it was just totally free. There was no resistance at all, totally loose. And I was like, oh no, that doesn't feel good. And the belt is just some part of that mechanism is just busted now. I guess my fix ended up breaking it in the long term. I don't know. I couldn't have known. Maybe I could have known. I have no idea. I'm not a microwave expert. I've never really seen the mechanism down there. But, yeah. So now I have to do this really obnoxious thing where I put something in the microwave, I turn it on, and then I have to turn on for like half. It sucks because it varies by food and how much food there is. I have to kind of like eyeball it. I gotta kind of figure it out on my own. Like turn it, let it cook in that position for a little bit, then open it, manually turn it around, and then close it and let it go for a little bit longer. But it has unlocked some new potentials. It's forced me to get creative, and I've made some discoveries. For instance, I've always cooked hot dogs with just the regular microwave setting because it's fast, and usually I just want to get some fast hot dogs. Turns out, if you use the reheat function, they come out like piping hot on the inside. If you use the reheat, I was just like, man, it's such a pain in the ass because part of it's always cold, or it's cold in the middle or something. Why don't I just try the reheat, because that's almost like cooking on medium. So I did, and they came out, and they were like a really nice level of hot all the way through. And I was like, this is better than just cooking them with the regular microwave settings, cooking it on high. I think that's my go-to from now on. So, limitation breeds innovation in microwaving techniques. I feel like I'm so ahead of the curve on this compared to most people. If this was something like, physics or whatever, I'm like the Isaac Newton of microwave operation. And if I don't think I'll be appreciated until after I die. I think in my own time, people will not understand my work or my contributions to this medium. In any event, there were no comments or questions last time. So actually last time was the Terry Wolfinger interview, technically. And that was great. Terry was awesome to talk to. Make sure to check out his stuff. But it also meant that I got lazy, and I was like, what if I just didn't put up a podcast? But that also means I have a bunch of stuff to talk about, mostly related to a bunch of more Miyazaki movies. So as opposed to previous marathon binges we've done, We're gonna just front load. There's literally like how many are there today? One, two. Well, we watched like 4, but before that, I want to talk about this news story that came out technically 2 weeks ago. But we actually have great timing, for me only, because there was a follow-up story. There's a further development as a direct result of it. So Sony, specifically PlayStation, has just laid off, like 900 people worldwide. Absolutely insane amount of layoffs. And another one in the long line of layoffs that have occurred in the gaming industry as a result of bad foresight, or honestly, most likely just negligence. So why specifically Sony or PlayStation? What's happened recently that might inform their decision to do that? Well, the PS5 hasn't sold as well as they wanted it to, and I think that's really funny. Not because people lost their jobs, but because they thought that it was going to sell more than the PS4. I don't know if they planned for it to sell more than the PS4, but like that's kind of the implication. So, I just quickly read a little bit from there's a VGC article about this. Sony says it expects PlayStation 5 hardware sales to gradually decline during its next fiscal year, which runs from April 2024 to March 2025, and confirmed it plans to release no major existing franchise titles during this 12-month period. So basically the article goes on to describe how the PS5 sales have fallen below the projections or the targets for 2023 mainly. And okay, I read this somewhere else. I couldn't find it again, so take this with a grain of salt. But apparently, PS5 sales were behind. Right now, they're slightly... So we're basically entering... This is the midway point of the PS5's lifespan. Because can you fucking believe it's been 4 years? Dude. COVID was like a black hole. It was like a whirlpool of culture and history. Like, okay. There was this tweet I saw months and months ago. It was some engagement farming tweet kind of thing. It was like, reply to this with a movie that came out the year you graduated high school. And I didn't take the bait. I didn't reply to it. But I did like think about it for a second, because it struck me, what movies came out when I graduated from high school? Now, I was of the class of 2020. COVID lockdown happened near the beginning of my second semester. So, I was just racking my brain. What movies came out in 2020? And I'm looking. I just looked up now because at the time, I was trying to figure out what came out, and I just could not. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't think of anything. Sonic the Hedgehog came out. Birds of Prey. Bad Boys for Life was the highest grossing American film of 2020. Domestic gross. That's... What the fuck? Bad Boys for Life? Are you serious? Doolittle, which, hey, Terry Wolfinger did some artwork for. The Invisible Man. There was a Call of the Wild? Oh, that was that movie with wait, that was based on the novel. Okay, yeah. That was the one with Harrison Ford and the CGI dog. Crudes, A New Age, Tenet, Wonder Woman 1984. Like, I couldn't remember any of this stuff coming out in 2020. It was like this total blank spot in my memory. But yeah, the PS5 did come out in November of that year, which means that it's been 4 years, and it feels like absolutely no time has passed at all. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, COVID, and people just have a lot going on. Number two, is it safe to say at this point that the PS5 has been kind of a lame console? Like, it's been pretty boring. The PS4 was sort of like this, but they at least had, I think eventually by the end they had a pretty interesting library of games. The PS5 has suffered a lot from this sort of new mindset that Sony's been implementing this generation, and I think it's done them a disservice in the long run, and that is focusing more on big budget AAA games, not quadruple A. They're not on Ubisoft's level yet. Make no mistake. Big budget AAA games at the expense of, like AA mid-budget titles and more interesting, or at the expense of variety. They've basically gone for the international market. That means Americans. And I say that because there was this other stat. There was an article with MSNBC which said that one of the other kind of alarming stats for their business is that not just are their hardware sales down, I mean, after the first couple years of a console's lifespan, you would expect the sales to go down. Most people, after 4 years, most people who were going to buy it have already bought it. Let's ignore the the historic shortages and supply line issues, which actually I was expecting this when I saw the first kind of headlines, and then the graphs actually proved me right. I was thinking, I'd bet that the initial 2020 and like 2021 sales figures for the PS5 were pretty low. And then I imagine they swung way back up in like 2022, and that's exactly what happened. They were fairly low for the first 2 years, and then as soon as COVID kind of started winding down a little bit, or at least the pandemic aspect of it, and some of the supply chain issues got sorted out, and the shortages weren't as big of a deal, the sales shot way up, and then they started falling off. So that's kind of normal. There was like a big catch-up period. That's not that weird. But the other stat is that which might be more important, honestly, in the long run, is that their margins on game sales have gone down. I believe they're at 6%, down from like 9%. Down from like oh my god, it was something crazy. It was like 10% or something. Or not 10%. It was like 15%. They were making some ridiculous margins off of game sales. And those have gone way down. And I think it compounds with the fact that's probably like a manufacturing problem. Also compounded by the fact that they just doesn't have any games. The PS5 has like 4 games on it that are like you would buy the console to play. They've really focused and honed in on getting these big budget AAA blockbuster type titles on the platform, and people only want to play so much of that. And your long-term user base is going to need a little more variety in what's on offer to them. Now, a lot of people lament the sunsetting of Studio Japan, which put out that was PlayStation Studio Japan or Japan Studio. Yeah, it was Japan Studio. Okay. Which was Sony's in-house first-party developer of A couple games you may have heard of. Gravity Rush, Ape Escape, Shadow of the Colossus, Ico, Patapon, Last Guardian, Legend of Dragoon, Knack, Ghost of Tsushima. Let's see. I think they were also involved in publishing a couple other ones. Yeah, so they've been involved. Wizardry 7. Really? That's interesting. I didn't know that. So they've been involved in essentially buffing up a lot, and ever since like 1999, they really expanded how much they did. Wild Arms, Jammer Lammy, a bunch of like really classic PlayStation titles, Vib Ribbon. Let's see. A lot of these are Japan exclusive, mainly. Oh, Dark Cloud. Mr. Mosquito. It's like weird games, right? Like weird kind of fringe niche titles that add a lot of character and a lot of new appeal to the console. Like if you just scroll down, a lot of these don't have... They did Lifeline. A lot of these don't even have Wikipedia pages, but they're like interesting, right? They did the Everybody's Golf series. They did some iToy games. Bleach Heat the Soul. Really? Just looking at this, I've never actually looked at the whole list. The whole list of Rule of Rose. Everybody's Tennis. All the Wild Arms games. And after they kind of lost that or decided, it's not really that important, the library of games has suffered a lot. I mean, they put out Ghost of Tsushima, right? Right, let me make sure that wasn't just... Yeah, and the Demon Souls remake, which, I mean, that was Blue Point. Published by, so they have influence on a lot of things like that. Bloodborne, so they do like a lot of, if not like full on publishing, they do like a lot of support development for games that you may have heard of. And of course, not everything they would put out is a success, but it leaned into what the strength of the PlayStation always was. If you go back to the PS1. Even, and the PS2 especially, is the PlayStation had games for everyone. I think one of the big reasons that they had so much success is that if you bought the N64, you were kind of like, it's like, okay, well, do you like Nintendo games? Do you like Rareware games? And it just didn't have as wide or rich of a library. Even if there were so many great games on it, the difference with the PlayStation is you had everything. You had so much shit, down to even experimental stuff. You had big budget stuff, down to experimental things like I just made a video a few weeks ago about LSD, right? So people of all ages, they had the first really notable console horror games with Silent Hill, with Resident Evil. They had like family-friendly games. They had puzzle games. They had action games. They didn't really have shooters. Console shooters wouldn't be a thing till like the Xbox. But they had so much variety on their system. And it's what gave them such an incredible reach. So that in one single console, they established themselves as really important players in the market. So when I think of Sony games, like you think of Nintendo, right? And there's what springs to mind immediately is all of the first party titles. Mario, Pokemon, Zelda, Kirby, Metroid, all of those. You think of Xbox, you think of Master Chief, I guess. And then you think of PlayStation, it's like, well, who's the PlayStation mascot? There's like so many characters that it could be. Who's the PlayStation mascot? And you could look at that as maybe a bit of like a brand weakness, but it's also a brand strength because it means so many different things to so many different people. And I think one of the more disappointing things about Sony post PS4 is that they've really narrowed down their scope of what kind of markets they're appealing to. Like the big budget games, great, whatever, you know, like do that as you would like. That is certainly a market that totally exists, and people tend to like those games, you know. People tend to those games are very well received, but like beyond that, once like the hype wears off, where's the long-term excitement? It's a lot of appealing to, I think, more of the surface level audience, the people who don't really want to delve deeper into the library or play a wider variety of games. And those are the people who form your hardcore audience, you know? Like, if you want if you want to, I think, sustain a really healthy audience, yeah, of course you have to appeal to new people and you have to appeal to just the more mainstream consumers. But the people who are always going to stick around for you are the people who are going to remember, oh yeah, they put out, I love Ape Escape, I love Vib Ribbon, I love Gravity Rush. Like those are the games that, yeah, I'm excited for all the big budget stuff, but I really want to see all the cool other more niche stuff, more trending towards niche titles that they put out. The other thing with the PS5's low sales, beyond just kind of like obviously the shortages, the lack of really interesting software, and a variety of software, is I would never, if I was an analyst, because I'm so good at a job that I don't even have, I would never predict that the PS5 would sell more than the PS4. I really wouldn't. Because, like, honestly, the fact that the PS5, if it's even on par with the PS4, I would find that kind of successful. Especially when you factor in the pandemic, people being on harder times, the economy recessing in the year we put it out. Dude, what is with that? What is with Sony having an insanely popular console and then putting out their next one at like way too high of a price point and being like dicks about it right before a recession? Does God hate PlayStation? Is that what that is? Is that karma? It's happened twice. It's like a curse. Dude, if the PS6 does really well, savor those years. Because right after that, shit's gonna, like, I'm sure World War III is gonna start. But beyond that, like, the reason the PlayStation 4 sold so well, it's not just because of the games they had on, which, by the way, I still remember that for like 2 or 3 years, there was a joke about how the PS4 only has Bloodborne. Like it's the only game they had. The reason they did so well was because they stole like all of Xbox's market share. That's why the sales for the PS4 were so high, because they stole all the Xbox customers. It's like, yeah, of course it's going to be like double what it was previously, because your competitor just keeled over and died. You should be thinking Don Matrick, you know. And I think this is like a really interesting situation because, okay, so one thing that I find really fascinating about the games industry and tracking its long-term evolution is that of all the entertainment mediums, video games are the only ones like to be in the digital age, the true digital age, right? So we have a lot of records of things like advertising and demographic data. And that lets you observe some pretty interesting things. Like, okay, video games, when they had so at least in the US, and it's different, I want to say outside of Japan. In Japan, video games were always like kind of family. They were kind of aimed at families. But in the US, and I would assume for a lot of other Western countries, games were initially targeted in the 80s, like when console gaming really started booming worldwide because Nintendo started exporting all their shit. And there was a big market vacuum due to Atari killing themselves to focus on PCs. Go watch my YouTube short about that. Plug. What was I saying? Games were marketed primarily as a thing for kids, which like that was the main audience. That's why they were considered toys for so long. So it's really interesting because if you start around the NES and you start looking at like, okay, I would say the modern video game, the home console industry, the modern one, it's an important word here, starts around the NES. And it starts with like being aimed at children. And year over year, the age demographic of, let's say, the average video game player has gone up. So it goes from like kids to, let's say, like, teenagers, and then a few more years go by, which is, maybe like a whole console generation goes by. And each one kind of like levels up to like, now we're cracking around like maybe college students with like the PlayStation, right? And then one of the reasons that I think the PS2 was so huge is that you started getting into like the 20s demographic where people have like money, and like jobs and stuff. And if you remember back when I made that video about the Nintendo E3 2008 and Iwata talking about the average age of consumers for the Wii, that's, I think, one of the reasons that the 7th gen was such an accelerative time for the industry, where it just fucking exploded. It wasn't just the increase in technology. It was also that, like, I think that's around the time that the average age of like a gaming audience started cracking like the 30s, where you got people who were adults who were, not everyone, of course, around that time, but a lot of people then at that age are a lot more settled and financially secure. You've usually had a job or some kind of profession for a couple years at that point. Not everyone, but you start getting more people like that. You're starting to break into like the homeowner demographic. And that means that hardware sales were just up across the year. So year over year, the games industry has grown. And I think a large part of that is because the demographic is literally growing up. The demographic of people is literally growing up. And also, all of those kids who started playing games in the 80s, when it was a kid's toy, are now adults, right? They're all like in their 40s. And maybe some of them dropped off of it. They're not as interested in it anymore. But others are still into video games. So if I was an analyst and I was doing my guess at where the console sales would go for this generation, I would say, well, we kind of stole all of our competitors' market share. So we saw a huge boom in sales last generation. I would expect that this next upcoming one, the PS5, if we can at least get on par with the PS4, that would be a success. If anything, they're not going to see the same kind of explosive growth that they did in the PS4 generation. It's just, if anything, it's just going to be, I would say, probably more incremental, long-term growth in sales as just the average age goes up. But with that being said, now that you have a much more broad mainstream audience, you have to actually put out products that appeal to different sectors of that audience, which is weird, right? Because you'd think that would be less successful when you had a smaller niche, like, oh, just focus on big mass appeal things. But they didn't, and it was still successful for them back then. There was also a tweet by, I believe, David Joe, the journalist. games journalist, who mentioned, he put out a theory, and I actually think this is pretty spot on. I co-sign this, that this exact scenario is the reason PlayStation has been expanding into the PC market. They realized at some point in the last few years that consoles and PCs are not really competing markets. They're different markets, and of course they have a lot of overlap, but they don't compete in the same way PlayStation does with the Xbox. Well, compete with the Xbox, in big quotes. So it's actually, it doesn't really cut into their sales to start expanding into the PC market and start porting some of their big games over to Steam, right? And yeah, actually, I would wager to bet it hasn't. I think they've probably only seen growth. It's just an additional market. They see it as a lateral move, essentially, which is probably smart for them, and it's good for consumers. Isn't that neat? Yeah, so I find the video game industry so interesting to keep track of, and one of the I was thinking about why I'm such a nerd about this and why I'm so into this stuff, and I realized why. It's because when I was like 11 or 12. That was when the PlayStation 4 Xbox One thing happened. That was when the launch happened. That was when the Dawn Matrix happened. I remember, dude, like I was always interested in games, of course, as a kid, and new consoles coming out, that's exciting. But what really hooked me and never let me go was that fucking video. And I saw this the other day because it was the anniversary. I was literally just thinking about it, and it popped up on Reddit for me because it's like the anniversary of it being uploaded. If you've never seen it before, go look up, I think it's called How to Share Games on the PS4. Yes, official PlayStation used game instructional video. That's what it is. Just look up like PlayStation used game instructional video. Go look that up. And if you know the context behind like the specific day that video came out, dude, it was so hype. It's the only industry where CEOs have like rapper beef with each other. It fucking rules. It's so like it's horrible, but it's also really fun to watch. They fucking they clowned on them so hard. And I saw that and I was like, this is the most interesting industry in the world. Like, the movie industry doesn't do this. No one else does. This is the only industry where like they get in the mud with each other. And I love that. And it's made me a lifelong observer, Like I feel like it's the same as if you were a kid around the time there was if you had like a passing interest in sports or basketball, let's say, and then it just so happened to be around like Michael Jordan's peak career. Like, you'd probably be watching that and you're like, I am just going to follow basketball for the rest of my life. I don't care how boring or shitty it gets. I'm going to follow this for the rest of my life. That's me with the video game industry. I used the bathroom. I'm back from the bathroom. Wow. Oh, I almost forgot to mention. So, I put up this video like a week ago on my side channel called the Cellar Plus R. It was called Failed and Obscure Punctuation Marks. And it's just me on camera talking about that. Just like a little Wikipedia rabbit hole I went down, basically. Because I think punctuation and grammar is interesting and cool, because I'm like a writer guy and all that. And randomly, that video like blew the fuck up. It got like 130,000 views or something. Like, ridiculous. And the subscribers for that channel jumped from like 30 people to like 3,000 or something on a video that took me an hour to make. So that was cool. And what was really interesting, because the comments just would not stop on that video. It was a little bit overwhelming. And I liked reading a lot of them. Some of them I didn't like reading. But I liked, some people gave me some interesting information about this or that. A lot of people left comments about things that 20 other comments had said the same thing about. One thing I thought was interesting. So, you guys know how I look, right? There were a lot of people on that video, like at least 5 that I caught, who, like, I think thought that I was trans. like, there was a couple people asking me what my pronouns were. Someone asked if I was boy moding, which, if you don't know, that's like a slang term. Boy moding refers to when trans women dress in a boyish, masculine way to hide their identity as women. Usually because either they're not out to certain people, or just out publicly in general, or to avoid harassment and stuff like that. So it typically, like, I know a little bit about this stuff. It usually means like wearing kind of like baggy clothing and stuff like that, like baggy clothing and pants and all that, and just kind of like hide their figure and stuff. And the funny thing is, that's just how I dress. Like, that's just how I dress in general. Like, I'm a very comfort first kind of guy. And like, okay, I'm in a weird position when I buy clothes, which is very rarely. But when I buy clothes, I'm in a weird position because I am fairly tall. I don't know if it is very obvious on camera, but I'm like 6 feet tall. However, I am not very wide. I'm kind of thin and lanky. So if I buy like a men's large, it's a little baggy on me, but it fits. It like fits fine. It's a little baggy on me. And if I buy a men's medium, it's like a little snug, like it's a little tight, not like uncomfortably so, but just, kind of snug. And it feels weird to me. It almost feels like skin tight. And if given the choice between the two, I will usually just pick the large because I would just prefer being a little comfy. So I happen to, I guess I just happen to look and dress like a certain type of trans woman, which is ironic because I'm 140 pounds of all-American man, baby. I have to remember my weight. I haven't weighed myself in a while. There's no way I'm over like 140 at this point, though. I've been underweight like my entire life, and it's not because I have any sort of eating disorder. I've just always been like 10 pounds underweight. Like, I eat a fair amount. It's just I don't get hungry very often. Maybe I'll just have to wait a few years. Then I'll get nice and fat as my metabolism slows down. But that's the situation that I'm in. Yeah, a lot of people in that video, I don't know. I screenshotted a couple of them because there was just some weird comments. There were some weird comments on that video talking about like my appearance. Someone said I had voluptuous hair, and then corrected it. I mean voluminous. I know I said more than these. Hang on. A lot of comments about my appearance, saying I'm pretty. I look like Michael Cera cosplaying my. This video was incredibly helpful. He looks like Michael Cera cosplaying my girlfriend's mom. I love this topic. Are you a boy moder? I'm sorry, I just had to say that the entire video, looking at you, all I could think of was least queer grammar nerd, and I couldn't say this more lovingly. I'm not. Great video, and also you're cute. Keep it up with both. Okay, this one was crazy to me because I finally got a gay compliment. Have I ever talked about gay compliments before? Okay, let me explain. Okay, so a few years ago, I went on this little like YouTube algorithm rabbit hole because I found this channel that was called I'm from Driftwood. And it was essentially a series of testimonial stories from various LGBT people talking about their life experiences. And some of them were really nice and wholesome and made me feel good. Some of them were, a little harrowing. Some of them were kind of depressing. They ran the gamut from all sorts of different experiences, different types of people. And I really liked that series. And the videos were generally usually short, like under 7 minutes kind of thing. So I ended up watching a bunch of them, and I was reading the comments, and I discovered a phenomenon which I call the gay compliment. So here's what it is. I'm going to let you in on my observation, my little secret observation. Here's the structure of a gay compliment. There's 2 parts to it. Number 1 is a friendly compliment. Number 2 is a barely restrained attraction to that person. So, for instance, be some guy talking about his experiences and all that, and you go down in the comments, and you'll find one that's like, wow, he's such a great storyteller. And very handsome, if I might add. or, wow, she's really brave for going through that. And she really knows how to pick out an outfit. And like, it was such a consistent pattern that I found on all of them, but usually the ones with the younger peoples, and I imagine these are younger people leaving them, that I eventually noticed this pattern across so many of them that I eventually just came up with this theory of the gay compliment. So I finally got one. Great video, and also you're cute. I know that's a gay person. So that's my little story. I'm sure once if you're a little gaybo or a little queer person, and you spend enough time on the internet, tell me if my observation is right or not, or if you've noticed that yourself. That's what I call it, the gay compliment. What was I going to talk about? Oh, we watched a bunch of Miyazaki movies. We watched 4, and I guess I'm going to talk about them. So previously we just watched Spirited Away. Yeah, just Spirited Away. That was the only one I talked about previously. So the first one we saw was Ponyo, and Ponyo is apparently Kat's favorite. She said it's. I think she texted her friend that we were watching it, and her friend was like, Pikyo? I was like, okay, fine, all right. I guess you really like this one. And I've always heard Ponyo, it's like kind of a kid's movie, kind of simple, And I kind of tempered my expectations, kind of in the same way that I did going into the Mario movie or something. And I had a really good time. I liked it. I liked Ponyo quite a bit. We're watching the English dub for all of these, mind you. So that's when I talk about the performances, that's what I'm talking about. It's specifically the English cast. Ponyo, it's a very simple story of a little fishy named Ponyo, whose dad is Liam Neeson, which is a weird... It's not a bad performance, it's just a little weird for the character. And she's a little fishy, and her dad is like this human who's gone to the sea, and he's almost like an ocean wizard who creates life. And she escapes and meets a little boy in Japan named Sosuke, and they become friends. And she gets like a little human form, and it's just kind of like cute little kids being friends and having it's like little kid kind of, not romance, but like they like love each other in like a little kid way. It's sweet and kind of wholesome, very wholesome. The conflict is just like nothing really bad ever happens. There's conflict and all that. And there's some moments of like danger, but overall it's a relatively low stakes movie that's just kind of cute and pleasant. And I think if you watch it with that in mind, especially if you have kids, I think it'll play really well. I think a lot of Miyazaki's movies probably play very well to a child audience because of his kind of brand of fantasy, and especially some of his more easygoing movies. And yeah, I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did, but I just kind of had a really good time the whole way through. It is structured in a slightly strange way, which I think is just, I've realized is just a Miyazaki thing. Later on, the last one we watched, spoilers, I guess, was Kiki's Delivery Service. And I also noted how that one has a kind of strange pacing where it doesn't really feel like a movie. I was thinking about Ponyo and why it feels long, even though it's not that long. It feels long because it feels like a 3-episode OVA more than it does a single movie. And I'm pretty sure it was based off of a book. A lot of his movies are based off of books or other source material. Well, technically Ponyo's kind of based off of, it's sort of The Little Mermaid. Was it based off a book? It was animated. No, it was not based off of a book. Nope. Okay. But that's kind of what it feels like. It feels like I felt like I'd watched 3 episodes of a story that each had their own kind of beginning, middle, and end, but strung together. Because the climax kind of happens in the middle. It feels like the climax. It's not technically the climax. It's structured in a really weird way. I'm assuming you've seen Ponyo, and also if you haven't, I mean, how much do you care about spoilers? But essentially, what happens is she escapes. She meets Sosuke. Sosuke keeps her in a bucket, and they have they spend the day together. They do cute little stuff. This is when she's still a little fish. And then at the end of the day, Liam Neeson wizard dad comes and takes her back to his little underwater castle. Ponyo escapes after he leaves and fucks a bunch of shit up in the process, causes a bunch of mischief, and causes a bunch of like a tsunami basically to happen. Not like a disaster, like a super bad one. Actually, everything is underwater by the end, but it's like a weird tsunami. I don't know. She caught this huge storm is triggered because of her. She's now in her like little girl form, and she's running on the waves to go meet Sosuke, and the storm is just raging around her, and the waves are just like miles high. And then they pick her up on the side of the road and go back to their little house on the cliff. And then the movie just kind of like resets. There's this big danger-filled storm tsunami sequence. And then we get in the house and we just kind of have a chill little time. It's very cozy. We're going to make ramen, she's learning a little bit about the human world, and it's just kind of kids having fun together. And then in the morning, they set out on a boat that Ponyo makes bigger with her like magic or whatever. And they just kind of sail around and look for his mom, because she went to go help the seniors at the senior center she works at. And they're looking around for her. And then they kind of just when they get to the senior center, they just kind of stumble across like the emotional climax of the movie, where Sosuke has to prove that he really does love Ponyo. And it's weird. I feel like if it was a more traditionally structured film, like if it followed a more traditional 3-act structure, you would get Ponyo would like over the course of that first day would have gotten into like her human form just naturally or whatever. Interaction with human beings, right? Causes it or whatever, which is why he wanted to keep her away from the people. And then at the end, or at the end of the second act, after they've been friends the whole time, Liam Neeson dad comes, takes her back, and then she escapes, causes the big tsunami, and then during the tsunami big climax sequence, that's when Sosuke has to prove that he loves Ponyo and all that. But instead, those events are like cut out and separated. Because I'm like, oh yeah, we have to spend time with Ponyo as a little girl, and then both as little kids, and her not just being a little fishy. And it does, like, the movie, it does eventually cover all the ground it needs to, but it just does it in a weird way that wouldn't be, it's not as traditional a way. It's fine. I don't mind it. And I really enjoyed Ponyo overall, but he definitely does weird stuff with the way he structures his films. And that carried over into the next one we watched, the absolute polar opposite of Ponyo, the Princess Mononoke. Mononoke is a significantly more mature movie. It is very violent, and deals with some kind of heavy subject matter. Mononoke is what I liked about it. It feels like an older style of movie. It feels like a movie from like the 60s or the 50s or something. Like if you've watched old samurai films, it has that kind of pacing and that kind of atmosphere and tone that they have, where it's slow in a sense, but it's also it's another like really long one. It's like 2.5 hours. It's at least 2 hours. It feels like 2.5 or 2 hours 15, something like that. But I really liked it. I think when we watched, after we were done with Mononoke, I think I would say it's probably my favorite one that we'd watched. It's essentially about a prince. It takes place. Okay, so what I like about it is that he doesn't fuck around at all in this one. He gets straight into the inciting incident. Like, it's the first scene of the movie. You get no time to, like, establish, the hero's journey, establish what their status quo is like. He's like, nope. This guy, I guess he's like a prince. What actually is he? He's some guy, it's in feudal Japan. Oh, there's a demon. He kills the demon, but his arm gets injured in the process, and it has this, like, black and purple infection. And he has to go to the west. He has to go westward to find the origin of what they think made this, like, giant boar turn into a demon, this iron ball. And he travels westward, and it's like, I don't even think you find out he's a prince until the scene where he's told that he has to go, right? Where he essentially, like, is exiled or excommunicated. Not really. It's not that harsh. It's just kind of like he's sent out. That's this. It's the same scene where they establish that he's the last in the line because their clan had been pushed out and almost wiped out and fled to the east, and he's the last in the noble bloodline, and he's a prince, and now he has to go to the west to even have a chance of maybe finding out how to break this curse that's going to kill him. But no one really has that much hope that he's going to be able to do that. So they've kind of resigned to the idea that he's just going to die and the noble line is going to be wiped out. And this is all it happens in one. This is all established in like one scene. And then he's just off. He's just off. I will say that in that same scene when he cuts his hair off, he cuts like he's got this like top bun and he cuts it off, which in Japanese fiction, that this happens in a lot of Miyazaki movies where characters cut their hair off or they cut their hair. That's a very Japanese kind of symbol for making a change in your life is cutting your hair. Ooh, did you hear that neck crack? That was crazy. It's like your hair almost represents this thing that's been built up, and you cut it off to signify that you're shedding something. I think that happens in Naruto, like Sakura or something. That's actually how I would think I was introduced to that idea, and then I noticed it in other Japanese stuff. And the haircut he has afterwards, dude, I looked at Kat and I was like, Miyazaki knows how to draw one haircut. That little bowl cut he draws on all of his boys, his beautiful boys. So he travels to the west, and he finds this town called Iron Town, where it's this little community that's led by this woman named Lady Oboshi, and she is basically mining for iron in the mountainside that the town is next to, in order to harvest iron to turn into bullets, because she has introduced the rifle into this feudal society. And she's basically just like a conqueror type. She's like a greedy conqueror. And she employs all these people in Irontown. And they are relatively happy with their lives, as a matter of fact. She also happens to be like deforesting the mountain and all that, which has brought her into a direct conflict with Princess Mononoke, who is, I think, only ever referred to that one time. Her real name is San, and she is a human girl who was given to these wolf spirits that lived in the forest as a baby. And now she considers herself to be a wolf instead of a human, and makes it her mission, along with her kind of wolf siblings and mother, to defend the forest against Lady Oboshi and her kind of encroaching exploitation of natural resources. So there's an environmentalist angle to the movie, but also, so what I really liked about it is that the main character, Ishitaka, he shows up, they ask him, he has this kind of whole experience in Irontown, because he ends up saving two of Oboshi's men after they get knocked off a cliff after San and her siblings attack this kind of, they're like transporting some supplies and all that across the mountains. So he saves these two people, and he kind of gets in with the people of Irontown. They actually like him a lot. He meets Lady Oboshi, and he's just trying to figure out what's going on. And I think they ask him what he wants or why he's there. And he says, "I'm here to see with eyes unclouded by hate," which is what the wise woman who sent him off from his village told him. And the movie has a lot going on. I'm sure there's much more in-depth analyses that you could read than just mine after one viewing from like 2 weeks ago. But what I was picking up on was that there was a lot of the movie is dealing with conflicts between groups of people, and whether or not those conflicts are necessary and what has driven them to these points. Because what I found interesting is that, yes, there is like a faction in this conflict that represents nature and the natural world and all that, but they aren't necessarily pinned as entirely being good or wise or always in the right. That in their own way, they're kind of blinded by their own hatred of human beings. So like this clan of the boars show up. All the boars show up, and there's these giant animals, right? And they are essentially, Ishitaka notices that they are almost, they're very like militaristic in their, they're very militaristic in the way that they hate the humans, and they organize, and they're going to kill them. And yes, technically they are in the right? Like, it's not good that I think most people would agree, it's not a good thing that Oboshi is destroying the forest and is trying to kill the forest spirit, which is also its own spirit animal. It's not a good thing, and that's going to kill the forest and all that. Most people would agree. But the kind of emissaries or the liaisons of nature are as susceptible to the same kinds of emotions that cause the human beings to be destructive. Actually, they're kind of different, because Oboshi is largely just driven by greed, and the animals are driven by kind of a protective need to protect their environment. So they're acting like largely in self-defense. But they aren't like, when they see Ishitaka, they want to kill him. They just assume that he's like a piece of shit because he's a human being. And they're not entirely right on everything. Just because they have sort of that's what it is. Just because they have the moral right, does it make them instantly correct, pure, perfect characters who are right about everything? And Ishitaka's unique position is that he's coming into this whole situation with no attachment to either side. Obviously he is a human being, and he has these nice relationships, and he meets a lot of cool people in Irontown who like him and all that. But at the same time, he has a connection to nature. He has clearly like a reverence and a respect for it. You could see that his home village is not particularly industrialized. And I really like this moment when he's transporting two of the two injured men who were injured by San and her wolves. And he's carrying them. He's carrying one of them. The other one is able to walk, but he's carrying one of them. They're going through the mountains and through the forest, and he ends up kind of like in the heart of the forest to the sort of lake where the nature, the spirit of the forest resides. And there's this really nice, slow scene of them resting by the water, and he sees in the distance, he sees this kind of shape, this silhouette of what almost looks like a stag, but it doesn't have like, it's got those elk horns, but it doesn't have like the head or anything. Walking through the sunlight, and he can't quite make out exactly what it is. It's just the silhouette. And it's this very serene, really beautiful moment, and then it walks out of view. And it's just, I don't know, he's a much more neutral party, and that kind of gives him, and he acts in the interests of both the people of Irontown, who are just kind of like regular people who just need work, as well as the forest and the spirits in the forest, that they can both come to an agreement. It's, the people of Irontown aren't these inherently evil people. They aren't driven by the same kind of greed as Lady Oboshi is. They're just being directed by someone who they don't have much choice. And even Oboshi herself isn't entirely written off as someone who is just plainly evil. And I liked that about it. You can definitely see like the ways that Miyazaki and his childhood in post-war Japan and kind of growing up in the aftermath of a conflict like that kind of shapes the way that he writes some of the themes that he injects into his stories. One thing so if there's anything I think to criticize about the movie, it would be some of the English dub performances. Most of the characters are pretty good. I think Ishitaka, thankfully, as the main character, does a very good job. Whoever plays San is like a little shaky for me. I thought her performance was like a little bit wooden. just a little bit, like not quite as good as I wish it would have been. Lady Oboshi has an English accent in the dub, which is weird to me, even though it shouldn't. It shouldn't be. I think it makes sense for the kind of character that she is, that she has a British accent, because she's kind of supposed to be, well, her name is Lady, so I imagine she had some kind of more lofty honorific title in the original Japanese. Who would it have been? Sama, maybe? Or maybe something a little more, like, antiquated. I'm not sure. That would have existed in feudal Japan, because their titles and stuff change over time and all that. I mean, like, most languages. But that's what she's supposed to. She's supposed to be this kind of, like, high breed kind of noble woman. And, she has this very posh British accent. And I think that, and she specifically, like, she sounds different from the other people. A lot of the people have kind of American, even like slightly Southern accents. And Oboshi she sounds like she's from somewhere else, and she sounds very high society, which works. It's just weird because I'm not used to hearing British accents in anime, and that's literally just it, because most anime gets dubbed in like Texas. The biggest offender is easily, what's his name, Toji or Toki or something, the little monk fellow, who is really kind of like the main antagonist. He's probably the closest thing to a villain that the movie has, and because he's a hunter, and he's just out there to just kill the forest spirit and take its head, essentially. He represents like the destruction of nature for nothing else really than just glory. He's not going to... There are many actually eco-friendly reasons to hunt. Like, a lot, like hunting is actually a very effective way to benefit certain ecosystems. If, you're hunting specific animals and there's only so many that you can kill in a season, like, population control is really important, and it's actually a way for human beings to kind of shepherd ecosystems to make sure that they're actually healthy. He's just out there because literally killing the forest spirit will explicitly kill the environment in the mountain. That's what it's going to do, and he just wants to do it. Unfortunately, he is played by Billy Bob Thornton, of all people. Of all people, he is played by Billy Bob Thornton, who I know does have, which is a weird casting, right? And he does have screen acting experience, but like, excuse me, remember when I was talking a few episodes ago about when you can really tell that someone doesn't have voice acting experience, even if they have experience with other kinds of acting? Yeah, he might be like the poster child of it in this movie, because he is like, it feels like he's barely even acting. He says every line kind of like this, and he never really stops and puts any breaks in between his sentences, and he just kind of keeps talking like this, and sometimes he goes up and sometimes he goes down, and that's basically just sounds like Bob Thornton. And he really sticks out as... He doesn't sound like a character. It just sounds like a guy talking in a booth. Right? Like, not a good performance. And it's unfortunate because he is like kind of an important main character. But his is not a good performance. But I like the movie overall. Oh yeah, it is very violent. It's weird. There's not a lot of... there is blood. There's blood and there's gore, but it's almost like separated. Like, there's moments where there's some animals in this movie who are fucking bleeding and just spurting with blood, and it's a little gross. And then you've got scenes where Ishitaka is like fighting. It's very like, it feels very like feudal fantasy, like Inuyasha, like feudal fantasy where things are kind of like heightened a little bit. So Ishitaka like shoots a bow at someone and he hits them in the head, but he doesn't just like kill them with that. Like their whole head pops off. Their whole head pops off with no blood. It's just completely decapitated. And same thing with like, he'll just knock someone's arm off with an arrow and they just go boom. Just like it's almost cartoonish. Yeah, weird violence. Weird violence, I would say. I wonder if they stopped him from drawing like that much blood on those scenes. But yeah, definitely a more mature movie. Has some heavier themes, some pretty heavy imagery. But a lot that I really liked about it. I think Kat said that she could tell I was really invested because I didn't say anything for like the entire movie. Like I didn't make any comments. I didn't make any stupid jokes. I was just kind of watching because I wanted to see where it went. And it is very long, and it winds and winds and winds, and you think you're at the climax, but no, you're not really at the climax. There's another 30 minutes left, and it's that kind of movie. Although I will say, unlike most of his other films, this one actually has somewhat of a falling action. A lot of his movies are just like climax happens. Done. It's over. Like they end on the resolution of the climax. There's no like, hey, here's what the characters did afterwards, or hey, here's how the story wraps up. It's just like done. We did it. Mononoke actually does have a couple minutes devoted to what's Ishitaka gonna do? What's San gonna do? What's Lady Oboshi up to? What's Irontown going to be like after all this? You know, what are the people of Irontown going to do? And that I appreciated just because I liked the characters. But yeah, I really did enjoy Mononoke. It's so long, I don't know if I would jump to like watching it again, but I did really enjoy my time with it. And I would say that it was my favorite, except we watched... After that, we actually, yesterday, 2 days ago, whenever we watched it, most recently, last time I was over there, we watched Howl's Moving Castle, which is a movie that I don't know, I don't hear that many people talking about it. I think this one was my favorite. I think I enjoyed this the most. I've come to realize I think I just prefer Miyazaki movies when he kind of stays away from surrealism and sticks more towards fantasy, because there is a difference between fantasy elements and fantasy storytelling versus surreal storytelling. And when he gets into the more surrealism, he kind of loses me, and I sort of just don't feel that much of a connection to what he's doing. But his fantasy stuff I find very charming and creative. And especially when he's like sticks to like telling us a plot, like a solid, relatively straightforward plot. I think I enjoy that more than when he kind of like dilly-dallies, which he likes to do. And so Howl is just that's just the movie where he does that. It's a fantasy film with some great ideas and some cool visuals. I love a lot of visual stuff going on in this movie, and it's all kind of supported by a story and a cast of characters that I was really interested in. It's like 2 hours long, but it never feels as long as his other movies. It doesn't feel as long as like Ponyo did, because the pacing never really like resets in the way that movie does. The story just kind of keeps moving along and going. And I found that really, it kept me a little more invested. So Howl's Moving Castle is about this. It takes place in a kind of fantasy setting that is very like German feeling. All the characters have British accents, which I think is funny. Because whenever we try to dub something into English and it's Europe, it's like it's supposed to be European inspired, we just go, British. It's like, you can speak English with a German accent too. Howl. Howl and his moving ist Castle in Neinen. So it's about this girl named Sophie who lives in this kind of fantasy Germany type of setting. And I love the architecture. I love the scenery. I love okay, so here's the other thing. There's a lot of shots in this movie and scenes that take place in what is very much like the Western European countryside. When I was 6 years old, we went to Germany to visit my mom's hometown and her parents who were still living there at the time. And they lived in rural Germany. And so I have a lot of affection for scenery like that. I think The Sound of Music, that type of countryside, just these beautiful fields of flowers and hills and these massive blue mountains looming on the skyline. I'm sure it's not a controversial thing to say that I find that's very beautiful, but there's also for me the added kind of personal aspect that I have a lot of fondness and affection for that because of one, my cultural heritage, and also I've been there. So that stuff was really appealing to me. I just love that setting. I love that. It makes me want to go to Europe again. Right, what was I talking about? Right, so this is a world where witches and wizards exist. And they have this kind of vaguely defined, mysterious kind of magic that they use. There's never a lot of effort put into explaining how the magic works. It just kind of does stuff. And thankfully, so when you have magic like that, where I think people call it soft magic systems as opposed to hard magic systems where you define everything really explicitly. When you do something softer like that, I think it's really important that magic doesn't just you don't just pull it out of your ass to solve the problem. If you're going to solve something with a softer magic, you kind of need to introduce the concept that a thing that can happen beforehand, so that it isn't just because when you go out and define everything, it's more when you kind of pull it out of your ass, it's less so that, and it's more so, oh, well, I already set up the rules that this works like this, so this is just an extension of what I've already established. And instead you're like, oh, that's clever. But when you don't define stuff and you do it like that, it's like, oh, okay, you just made a new rule up. You made up a new rule for how the magic works because you couldn't figure out how to write your way out of this situation. Howl never does that, which is nice. They just kind of the magic does a lot of stuff in the movie, but it never just comes out of nowhere. I need to finish talking about the premise. So Sophie gets a visit from this known kind of dangerous witch known as the Witch of the Wastes. And she tells her to get out of my hat shop, you fat fuck. And the witch curses her. She puts a curse on her to make her an old woman, which really surprised me. Because so now Sophie has to figure out how to break this curse of her being an old lady and get her youth back. And I was very surprised that for 80% of the movie, they stick to her being an old woman. I thought it was going to be, I think a lot of other writers might have fixed that, but had a solution to the problem, or kind of only half committed to her being an old lady. But no, there's a lot of time spent. You can also, this feels like a movie that would Miyazaki, I don't know how old, this is in early 2000s, I think, that he made Howl. You definitely get the sense that he had a lot of firsthand experience with elderly people, because there is a lot of I guess, attention put towards the realities of Sophie being old and having an elderly body. Like, her fucking bones hurt, and it's hard for her to get places, and she's just slower, you know? She's traveling out to the countryside to go find some wizard or something who can help her, and she's like, she looks back, she's like, oh my god, I've gone like nowhere. I've walked like 2 miles, and I feel like it's been like the whole day. And that's just what being old is like. Also, you know, I think another reason, it's just like the little personal things, I guess, that kind of make me really like this movie is I live with my grandma. I live with my amachi. That's a Basque word for grandmother. I live with my amachi. And she goes on, like, walks every day. And it takes her, like, an hour to get across the neighborhood, you know? Like, that's just what it's like. And I kind of liked that. It was like, it was like, oh, you don't see a lot of main characters who are old people, much less old women specifically. That's very rare. Miyazaki, most of his films are very female driven, but this one I thought was, I kind of appreciated the uniqueness of having an elderly woman be the main character really for most of the film. So she goes and she meets this wizard named Howl. Oh, this actually happens before she gets cursed. So there's this scene where she meets Howl during like a parade. She's in like an alleyway. Howl is being chased by some magical guys, some kind of shadowy blob monster guys. And he shows up, and in that one scene with Howl, a lot of things made sense to me about Kat. And I looked over at her and I said, hey, when did you watch this movie? Like, what was the first time you watched this movie? And she said, when I was like 3 or 4. And I said, oh, okay. So this like informed your entire taste in men, didn't it? And she said, yeah. Yeah. Especially like when his hair turns like brown, like when his hair starts changing colors and it turns brown, I looked over at her and I'm like, did you swipe right on me on Tinder because you thought I looked like Howl? She's like, maybe like a little bit. He's like, you. Yeah, it's kind of, it's, there were so many scenes where I was like, oh my God, this is where it started. Miyazaki goes out of his way to make Howl like this absurdly sexy guy, which I think is kind of rare for like male writers to be able to figure out what actually makes a man like sexy to a woman. But there's like just like the way he's shot and the way that he talks. He's voiced by Christian Bale, which is like kind of weird. It's not bad. It's a slightly weird choice because Bale has this very husky kind of voice, right? I think it ends up working. It grew on me. But just like the voice, the way he talks, the way he like refers to Sophie, and like, oh my God, like this scene where she's like cooking him she's cooking breakfast and he comes in and he gets like really close to her. And I looked at Kat and she was like fucking blushing. Oh my God. Oh, there's like one scene, like when he sets her down, like they go flying and he's like got her, he's like behind her and he's like got her by like the arms. And he sets her down on the balcony and he's like, all right, you just stay here, you just stay here for a little bit and I'll come back or something. And she's like, oh, okay, Mr. Sexy Wizard Man. And he says something like, that's my girl. And I looked over at Kat and she was like, It was really funny. And I liked Howl a lot as a character. She meets him. She finds his castle. His castle's so cool. I thought this was really cool. When I talk about his inventiveness, Miyazaki's inventiveness, it's called his moving castle because it's this big, almost steampunk looking moving fortress with all these different bits and big bits of housing and stuff, just a bunch of clutter, and it's on like these big metal legs that walk around. Really cool looking. And she goes inside the castle in like its back entrance, and the door outside, or the door, like the main door to get in, it has this little dial with 4 different colors, and like you twist it to like the green color, and she like the Howl's little apprentice boy, I forget his name, comes out, and he's got to do some business for him. So he and again, you know, she's walked into this moving castle that's out in the countryside. He comes in, turns it to like the blue color or something. He opens the door, and it's in a city. It's just in a different city. And you open the door to it changes. There's like this little device, this little magical device thing that changes where the door leads out of. Super cool. And Howl actually has like 2 different identities in 2 different cities that he does business in. Really neat stuff. He has this the one of the main characters. This is the flame in his fireplace named Calcifer, who's this fire demon who's bound to the castle. And and he's voiced by Billy Crystal, which also, did I say Billy Crystal? It is Billy Crystal, right? I'm not confusing him with anyone else. Okay. 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 We're okay now. Is it Billy Crystal? It is Billy Crystal. Okay. Mike Wazowski. He's voiced by Mike Wazowski. And again, a little weird. Not bad, but he definitely feels, he's got that Mike Wazowski energy, you know? And just a little weird coming from a different looking character. I think it works. He's funny. He's cute. And he like runs all the heat throughout the castle. And it just kind of like, Sophie is just, she can't tell. She's trying to get the spell broken on her, but she can't tell anyone about what the spell is because that's part of the curse. She can't tell anyone that the Witch of the Wastes made her old. So she's just trying to figure out, she's getting close to Howl to figure out what, if she can learn anything, you know, might as well go to a wizard. And Howl is this young guy who, he's like this enigmatic weirdo. And I like that. I like the Howl as a character. I can see people not really liking him that much because he's very immature and childish. And there is like a reason for that, like a very specific reason for why he is so immature. But I kind of just found, I enjoy that kind of character because he's just like me. He's just like me for real. No, but I just always kind of liked when he was on screen because he has this sort of, he's this very like, yeah, when you kind of look at him as being just like a guy who never really grew up, he's obviously got like wisdom and knowledge and stuff, but he's also very temperamental and can get really moody, and he's very image obsessed, and he fucking throws a hissy fit when his the blonde dye comes out of his hair. And so there's like this real contrast between Howl as this cool epic wizard guy and sort of like when you get to know him and how he's sort of like he needs to do a little bit of growing up. Excuse me. And Sophie ends up like it's okay, so Howl's Moving Castle, there's a lot of classic fairy tale analogs I found in Miyazaki movies. Ponyo is like, you know, the Little Mermaid. Maybe that's the only one. But this would, if this was going to be any one, it would be Beauty and the Beast. there's a lot of little, like, she's kind of forced to go to this castle. It's a little different, you know, she chooses to go to it, but the situation's a little bit out of her hands of what even motivates her to go there. She goes to this castle with this enigmatic weirdo who's like, he's like, you know, let's see, what would I describe Howl as? He's like a cool, let's see. He's a lanky, cool. When I say he's a lot like me, I mean that he's like a cool, lanky white guy who's a little fruity with it, but he's got that beast in him. I think Kat told me not to say that on the podcast. So he literally does have that beast in him because he like has this bird form, this like bird monster form that he can maintain. That's like his inner beast. That's kind of like his own curse almost. And Sophie kind of like they sort of like free each other from their own curses a little bit, because Sophie realizes that her kind of falling in love with Howl is what breaks her curse. Not breaks it, but diminishes it at least. Like, I really like the scenes where she gets younger and she doesn't even realize it. And there's some very subtle animation of her face getting younger and her nose changing and the wrinkles kind of her disappearing a little bit and her back kind of straightening out. And I thought that stuff was actually really clever. And I was like, oh, is she changing? And she doesn't even notice that it's happening, which I thought was funny. She doesn't even notice that, like, she feels differently at all, or she doesn't, like, look in the mirror or anything. Which at first I found weird, but then I realized it's kind of important that she doesn't really notice it, because she's not supposed to at that point in the film, she doesn't understand the meaning of, like, the message, essentially. I don't know the message. She doesn't understand. She feels love for Howl, but she hasn't fully acknowledged it, I guess. And Howl kind of like her loving Howl eventually lets him get his heart back. Literally. There's some great, I love so much of the world in this movie. I want to see more of it. It's one of those settings I just want to see more of. I love with a scene where they go to the royal palace and the Queen Solomon, I think is how it's pronounced. She doesn't have like a throne room. She's in this massive garden with like this big glass dome and walls. And I love that look. I just adore a setting like that. I think it's awesome. I don't know. I found all the characters really charming. I liked the fact that I like that Sophie is like this old lady, and she has kind of, she's a little bit indignant. She's a little, I think she has a very solid protagonist. I thought Howl was really fun to watch on screen, especially whenever he was doing magic stuff. I thought his little apprentice boy was like funny. He was like a cute kind of kid character. Calcifer as this sort of not quite comic relief, but he's got a little tood to him. I like the interactions where he was telling Sophie that, oh no, only Howl can ask me to do that, and then she's just threatens to like kill him with a bucket of water, and he just, okay, fine. Doing the fucking dishes, bitch. Yes, of course, Sophie. The way he's animated is really fun too. Like a lot of just the visuals and the characters' personalities. Oh, I love the little dog that joins them halfway through the movie. The little old dog. I thought he was really cute. And he's got big old floppy ears that he flies with. And I like the whole aspect of them sort of going from it just being Howl and his little apprentice boy to then Sophie joins, and then they get the little dog, and then eventually, after the Witch of the Wastes has her powers removed from her and she kind of reverts back into being a little old lady, she kind of loses like a lot of her more evil personality. that I thought was interesting. And she looks visually super different. And she's just kind of like a little old lady. And she'll just stare out the window and be like, wow. Like that's what they do. They're like building up into, like they say, like this little family. And I like that aspect a lot. I do like stories about groups of characters, funky groups of characters coming together and kind of forming little family type units. I like those. I think found families, I guess, is what they'd be called. I like stories like that. As long as the characters are interesting, or I like the characters, that's a type of story that I think, I don't know, it hits me in a very appealing spot. I don't know, I just really had a fun time with it. I was interested in what was going on. And the kind of ongoing, there isn't like a very obvious ongoing conflict. You kind of see how everything ties together near the end. But it's a lot of like inner character conflict. Sophie's trying to find out how to break her curse. Howl is kind of struggling with his, more war themes in a Miyazaki movie. Crazy. Howl is struggling with his obligations to, he hates war, and there's this war going on in the kingdom that he's been called to fight in, and he's got this kind of inner immaturity, but he also like hates war, and both of those aspects kind of contribute to this conflict of them trying to enlist him for battle. Which I find interesting. Again, coming from Miyazaki, a movie where one of the main conflicts is kicked off by forced enlistment, a forced draft of people. Also, hey, that scene where they're like, hey, a bunch of those like monstrous animals flying out of the airship, those are like wizards who transform themselves into monsters to attack our enemies. Flying down to like destroy themselves. Very interesting coming from Miyazaki. And Howl resents that. And he also himself has this kind of flying winged beast form that he is trying not to succumb to. Interesting. I don't know. I just kind of liked everything about it. It was just a movie where I just sort of liked everything about it, and I had a good time, and I would totally be down to watch it again. So I would say it's probably my favorite so far. Maybe we only have a couple more. We only have like literally 2 more to do. Something like that, at least of the Miyazaki ones. The Miyazaki Ghibli movies. So I might, maybe I'll do a little tier list by the end of which ones I'll rate them all. Like Fast and Furious. And then finally we watched Kiki's Delivery Service. Excuse me. So Kiki's Delivery Service is a movie that I've heard it's like a little bit polarizing. Some people find it really boring and other people really like it. And where do I land on that? I liked this one. I did. I ended up having a good time. Kind of in the same way, it's kind of similar to Ponyo in that regard. But I definitely see the argument for why a lot of people find it a little boring. So Kiki's Delivery Service is about Kiki, a little girl who is the daughter of a witch. And this takes place in, I don't know, that kind of some weird, it's not quite, it's like a kind of alternate world where basically everything is the same, like technology-wise. But, hey, witches are real, I guess. And they can fly and stuff. And they don't really cast spells. They just kind of, I don't know. You never get that much detail on it because it's not really that important to the movie. Kiki is 13, so she has to go out on her own and train for a year to be a witch. So she flies out to the big city with her cat, Kiki and Gigi. And she ends up, not struggling a bit to find a place and what to do, and she doesn't feel very confident in her abilities. And then she ends up getting a job living and working at a bakery where she starts a delivery service to deliver packages and bread to people. And it's just kind of like her going about her daily. There's not much of an overarching plot. It's a lot. Okay, when I said that it reminded me a bit of Ponyo. It isn't just the kind of like really laid back nature of it. It's that it doesn't really feel much like a story that makes a lot of sense for a movie. I found out afterwards that it was based off of a book, and that makes a lot of sense to me. My reaction after finishing it was it felt like a manga. It felt like a short, maybe like 15 to 20 chapter manga about, a couple little episodes of Kiki meeting people, making deliveries, and that are their own little stories. And it's not a movie that's in any rush at all to get you anywhere. There's like a whole sequence where Kiki has to deliver this this like toy to a kid, and in terms of like a big overarching narrative, the most that happens as a result of that is that a character gets introduced who wasn't like necessarily integral to the story of her getting. She's sort of integral, but like the whole thing about Kiki delivering this toy and then meeting this other character to try and because she loses it and she's got to go get it back, where she meets this character. It's like this. It doesn't feel like a thing that would be in a movie. It feels like, in Hunter x Hunter, when something's going on and some character is kind of introduced and they feel very incidental or very like utilitarian, like they're here to do this thing. And then like a bunch, like 20 episodes later, they show back up and they're actually like important to the plot. That's exactly like what this movie is structured as, like. Like, it's a very uncompressed feeling film. Very loose. Not a very tight script, very loose feeling script. And it's a lot of just watching stuff happen. And if you're looking for something that has a bit more of a plot, you're not going to get it out of Kiki's delivery service. You're getting what's on the tin. You're getting this little witch delivering bread to people. Things do happen, obviously. She has her own little internal struggles. It does eventually wrap around to a thing that I actually really appreciated. Kat was actually telling me about that this morning, because she was thinking on it, and I was thinking about it kind of right after I watched the movie. So we both kind of came to the same understanding. But the kind of towards the end, there's this conflict that gets introduced where Kiki starts losing her magic. She isn't able to fly. She can't talk to her cat anymore and understand him. And she's getting really freaked out. And she's trying to like fly, and she can. And she spends like half the day just practicing, and she can't do it. And she's freaking out and oh my God. And it's all, she's getting really depressed about it, and it's all kind of caving in on her. She's in kind of a crisis mode, and she meets that character that she met earlier, and she's like, why don't you just like take a break? She's like, what? Because she a little bit before that, they mentioned like, oh, her witch powers are all kind of just being used for business at this point, and she's kind of losing some of her spark, some of her motivation. You feel like, or it's not, using magic used to be really fun, and now it's just kind of like this thing she does for her delivery business, which at first was like the coolest thing ever, and now it's like man, it's just getting a little old. And it's very clearly a metaphor for being burnt out. It's not even a metaphor, it's what's happening. Kiki is burnt out on magic. It's become kind of, it isn't really special to her anymore, and it's lost that luster. It's just normal. And it's directly compared to this other character's painting and her artwork. And she talks about inspiration in finding inspiration to paint, and how sometimes you just can't paint anything, and it is totally Miyazaki talking about being an artist. It is really blatant if you start thinking about it that way. And how does Kiki kind of start getting her magic back? It's by realizing and remembering kind of like what makes her delivery business special. It's the way that she helps people. These great like there's this old lady that she helps, and she helps her like bake this pie, like this pot pie to for her, like her granddaughter's birthday. And Kiki, she helps out with the birthday pie and all that, and she helps her bake it, and they have this great cutesy little experience together of her and this old lady, and her helping her out, and then flying it all the way to the granddaughter's birthday party, and it starts raining on the way, and she's all soaked. And after all this, she gets to and there's like a party that she's going to be late for, that she got invited to by this guy who she kind of likes, but she's 13, so she pretends not to like him. And she gets to the birthday party, and she says, like, here you go. Here's this pie, this lovely pie that your grandmother baked you. And the granddaughter's like, ugh, fuck my grandma. Hate these fucking pies. What a bitch. What a stupid old bat. And that, like, really, really upsets Kiki. And she's, like, really depressed by that. Like, this, like, interaction. And she gets home, and she's all soaking wet from the rain, and she just doesn't even feel good about any of it. She missed the party, and she just feels like shit. And then, she's hanging out with that boy that she kind of likes, and they have this little thing where they go to the beach, and they have like this fun little time together, and then his friends show up, and he's gonna introduce Kiki to them. He's like, hey, Kiki, come over. And she sees one of the people in the car is the girl, that bitch granddaughter that she delivered to. And they all kind of like look at her like, ooh, it's that grody witch girl. And she just feels bad. She's like, it doesn't even feel worth it. She has these bad experiences, which when you're 13, make a lot more sense for stuff like that to be a big deal. It would make a big deal if, like, if I did something like that, I would be a little bummed out, You weren't even grateful for this, like, wonderful thing that your grandparent did for you. And she just kind of has to, like, reframe her mindset. It's a very low stakes movie until, like, literally the climax, where it turns into like a life or death scenario. And I like the climax a lot. I actually really enjoyed that. But most of the movie is these very small conflicts that don't mean too much, but they kind of build into Kiki learning these little lessons. It's kind of a coming of age story, in a lot of senses, where she's learning these little lessons about responsibility and working and how to deal with her emotions and all that, and fitting in with other people and making friends. And it's, if it's not what you're looking for, it could easily be really boring. And I totally get when some people say that I'm not really into this one, but I think I ended up liking it. I would probably put it maybe like in the middle, I guess. I didn't have too strong of a connection to it. Probably because I'm like 22, but I at least I think I can appreciate it. I think it's one of those movies, a lot like Ponyo or Spirited Away, that I think probably plays really well to like a more like child audience. Like if you're if you're around that age, like I think even Chihiro in Spirited Away is like 14. If you're around that like middle school age or younger, I think a lot of his more, I guess, family or like child focused films probably hit a lot harder for you. Not just because of the not just because of like obviously the cool fantasy and all that, but also because the characters are going through kind of childish struggles, which are fine, and that's a good thing to depict, right? Like, oh yeah, some kid is gonna watch this and be like, wow, I'm just like Kiki, you know? People think I'm weird for no fucking reason, and and it's I don't know. I appreciated it. Definitely not my favorite, but I did appreciate it. What are the rest that we have to watch? One of them was The Wind Rises, and Nausicaa and The Wind Rises, I think, are the two that we have left. Can you just give me the list? Yeah. Porco Rosso. Okay, sorry. No. Oh, wow. There's actually quite a bit. Castle of Cagliostro. Oh, that's Lupin the Third. Oh, that wasn't Ghibli though. What are the Ghibli movies? Because she just wants to do the Ghibli movies. I think wasn't Nausicaa the first Ghibli movie? Was that the one? Oh, the other weird thing about Kiki's delivery service when we looked this up, it got a dub in what was it, like 2000 something? But it wasn't. When did Kiki's Delivery Service come out? 89. I think it got an English dub in like 1991 or something. But before that, it got another English dub by an airline company. Yeah, let me hold up. An English dub was produced by Streamline Pictures for Japan Airlines international flights in 1989. And then Disney produced an English dub in 97, which was the first Ghibli movie that they distributed internationally. Okay. Yeah. How weird for Japan Airlines, specifically to be played on airlines. I guess if you were going to Japan, they were like, here's a Japanese movie dubbed into English. Probably not that well because it was 1989. Also kind of a weird one to put up with the climax that film has with the fucking Zeppelin like exploding and crashing. I don't know. I guess it was pre 9/11, you know? Let me just look up like Ghibli movies. The Ghibli Miyazaki ones. Castle in the Sky. Oh, it's Takahata. Oh, no, wait. Produced by Takahata. Directed and written by Miyazaki. Actually, there's a bunch that we haven't seen of Miyazaki's now. Castle in the Sky, Totoro, Porco Rosso, Whisper of the Heart, which was written by Miyazaki. I don't know if we'll watch that one. Arrietty was written by Miyazaki, and then also from Up on Poppy Hill. Okay, I guess that was Up on Poppy Hill was directed by his son. Okay, and then The Wind Rises. So yeah, I guess the main ones are still Castle in the Sky, Totoro, Porco Rosso, and The Wind Rises. And also because so many people recommended it to me after I talked about The Rescuers, I guess we should also watch Arrietty. Yep. So that's my... Man, we do have a bunch more to watch. I'll put together a list by the very end because I know everyone's really invested in what I think of Ghibli movies. And then finally, to wrap this up, I want to talk a little bit about a game which I haven't finished yet, but I'm like halfway through. And I don't imagine it'll drop off too much. That is Cultic. Cultic Episode One. So this game came out a while ago. There was a demo for it like a year ago or something like that, which I played and I loved it a lot. And then it came out and it was like a little out of my price range, but it went on sale. So I bought it and I've been playing it. I'm a couple hours into it. I'm like halfway through the game. Cultic is a boomer shooter. It's another in the long line of the boomer shooter revival games. It has... Okay, so... Dusk was definitely blood-inspired. It was definitely like... It was really obvious, especially in its aesthetics. Cultic is blood-inspired in its aesthetics as well as its gameplay. Looking back, Dusk doesn't have too much in common with Blood compared to a lot of other, that it doesn't have in common with, say, I don't know, like Duke 3D or even like, or Quake. I would say Dusk actually might even play more similarly to Quake than it does Blood, but aesthetic-wise, very much Blood-inspired. Cultic is going for both. It is very blatant about being a spiritual successor to the original Blood in its graphics, in its themes. Like it's about murdering the fuck out of a cult. If you couldn't tell. Brown-robed cultists with shotguns and dynamite. Wow. Does that sound like any game you've ever heard of? But in game, when I talk about gameplay, it's a lot closer to Blood. So, it's a crunchy, fast-paced, very, very good, like visceral feeling gunplay kind of shooter. But it also has these little, it's got dynamite. It's got the dynamite from Blood with the same kind of physics, and you can control how hard you want to throw it. Tossing it around corners. It works a little bit differently from the dynamite in Blood, where in that game you can either just toss it and it'll explode on impact, or you can light it and then it'll explode after a timer is done. In Dusk, if you just toss it without lighting it first, in Cultic, it's like dust. In Cultic, you can toss it without lighting it and then shoot it. You can shoot it when it's on the ground and explode, like remotely detonate it, which is fun. And you can also light it to make it blow up on a timer. It has, I'll say, more generous explosion physics than Blood does. Blood does have weird physics slightly. I love the way the explosions work in that game. But they're like this expanding sphere of death and not just like... So the cool thing in Blood is that when you toss the dynamite, in most other games, it just creates a big old hitbox explosion zone that does damage. In Blood, it's like creates that, but then it like in like a smaller area, and then it expands outward. So there's like if you're standing like a little bit away from the explosion, it'll like take like a split second to reach them. And also that applies to the physics as well. So things literally like blow away from the center of the explosion. And with how many little like destructible physics objects there are in Blood, it's so fucking awesome. It's so good. But there are like some tricky things in that game where like something explodes and it really feels like the explosion should have reached some enemy and it doesn't, and it can get a little bit janky. Cultic is a little more generous with that, and it generally feels like if something's around the explosion, it does get hit by it, which I appreciate. It has a little weapon upgrade system with these weapon parts that you can find and then use to upgrade your firearms at some specific workstations, some workbenches. The weapons feel really good. feel really good. This game has a really good shotgun, and it's a blood style shotgun where the primary fire shoots one of the barrels and the alt fire fires both at once, and then you got to reload after expending both shells, no matter what, which I always love shotguns that are designed like that, like the sawed-off from Blood. When you hit something with that thing, it's like... boom! So when I say that this game has like a really crunchy art style, it's low poly, and it's kind of like low resolution textures, but also the sound. The sound is a little like crusty sounding, you know? Like there's this, it'll do this thing where a sound effect will play and it almost sounds like it's breaking the what would you call it? The audio levels on like your speakers. And for these like big, it's not on everything. It's not just like constantly hurting your ears, but on these big like impact sounds, like when you get right up to something and just like punch a hole through it with your shotgun or set off dynamite or something. It's like, and you combine that with this massive, you know, lighting effects from the muzzle flash. It's not, I guess, muzzle flash. The muzzle flash and all the like viscera that pops out of them, and just the sound effect of like the hit happening and the sound of the shotgun itself, and then the impact. Like, it is really satisfying feeling. It feels like this thing fucking punches. It's a great shotgun. Another thing that I love is the pistol in this game, the handgun. So it starts off as like an actual worthwhile kind of like low damage, high fire rate kind of weapon. If you upgrade it to, I upgraded the, it's like every weapon will have like, or not every weapon as far as I can tell, but actually, yeah, every weapon. All the guns. Not the dynamite, and you get like Molotovs and like hatchets that you can throw, which is cool. Those can't be upgraded, but all the guns you can actually work on and upgrade. They each have like 4 unique upgrades, and that's it. The handgun, I upgraded it to have a tighter spread and do more damage. And that thing turns from like a pretty good little pistol to like a straight up like rail gun. It feels really good. It is like the revolver from Half-Life, kind of like you round the corner and I see an enemy down the hall and I just like double tap them. You just pop and it kills so many of the more thin enemies in this game. It feels really good to use. Almost a little too good, because there's a lever action rifle that you get, and that is also like a long range, almost kind of sniper type weapon. No scopes in this game, but that thing also just totally jibs enemies from long distances, and it also feels really good. But the handgun is just way higher rate of fire. So it almost like encroaches on it a little bit. I don't know. Maybe I just still have to upgrade the rifle so that it doesn't get like power crept out by how fucking good the handgun is. But whatever the balance, even if the game has some balance issues, potentially, I'm not even saying it does. I'm not even all the way through the game. But even if it does end up having some weapon balance issues, it's offset a lot by how good they feel to use. It's a really good feeling game to play. I'm also playing it on hard, and I'm not sure how that affects what actual effects the hard mode has. But it does play really well on hard. It was a little too easy at first, and then around like level 3 or 4, the levels are really long too. Which is why I think I beat like 1 per session. And then I had a little bit more time, so I was playing like 2 levels per session in the last couple times I sat down with it. They are very long, and they're good. They never feel too long. They just you're just like, wow, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on. What was I saying? Yeah, right. I'm only halfway through the game, and if there is actual weapon balance problems, I don't mind it too much because there's still time for it to develop and for... I don't know if they'll introduce any more ones. There's quite a bit already that you've got. There's like a handgun, there's the shotgun, the rifle, the hatchets, there's dynamite, there's Molotovs, there's like a machine gun. Do I have anything else? I don't even remember if I've gotten anything else. But yeah, really, really solidly made, really great atmosphere, which is another thing that I think is really integral if you're sending up a game like Blood, is to capture how potent that game's atmosphere is. There's some like real good horror vibes in this game, in Cultic. Like scenes where you, like moments where you walk into a room and suddenly the music goes out. And it's like a scripted thing that when you walk into that room, the music goes out and there's nothing around. And you're looking around and you're kind of tense because maybe I didn't even realize the first time that the music had cut out. And all you hear is the ambience and like the hum of the lights. And you're walking around and then you open, there's a door that's open like just slightly, it's open ajar just a little bit. And you go up to it and you open the door. And you walk in and then, boom, oh my fucking God, the music comes roaring back and there's some freakish, terrifying enemy with a chainsaw who starts gunning it for you. It's like, holy shit. And he has a bunch of health. Great little moment of build-up. Nice variety of environments as well. This takes place very much in like the 60s. In kind of in like a rural community where this cult has taken hold. Very similar feeling to kind of how the first episode of Blood takes place in like the kind of like European countryside. Yeah, it's always at night. Everything's at night in this game. You go through like a couple, like there's crypts, temples, warehouses, hospital. I don't know if there's like a mental hospital you go under, which is cool. Some cool, I don't know, just really nice environmental design. I'm just feeling it. It's just like another really solid boomer shooter to add to the pile. And I really enjoy the way that it's sending. Oh, the even more Blood references. All the stuff with fire. So fire is an important part of the original Blood. Because there's a lot of enemy interactions with fire, and you have several weapons that, or you have at least like the flare gun, which is essentially the pistol, has, like that's your main way of setting enemies on fire. It's very accessible to you. Cultic has the Molotovs, which can light people on fire, but it also has like lamps that you can pick up. You can pick up a lot of the items in this game, and you can toss them. And if you toss the lamps, they hit the ground or they hit an enemy, and they just start spilling fire everywhere and lighting stuff ablaze. And it's cool. I haven't noticed too many like specific interactions. Blood had like the zombies that you could take care of you could make sure that they were dead by burning them and stuff like that. But, yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I would totally recommend it. And it's episode 1, which is impressive. I imagine a lot of the work for episode 1 went into, like, making the basic game function. And then from there, it was all just, level design and stuff. Hopefully, the sequel is a little faster and easier to make, just because I imagine the mapping tools are kind of figured out at this point. The mapping tools and the engine and all that are kind of hammered out. So from there, it would just be like asset creation and probably new weapons and enemies and stuff like that. Like hopefully it easier time, because this game's been in development for a couple of years, like at least 3 years, I want to say. I think I played the demo back in like 2021. I might be totally off on that, but yeah, I dig it. Totally recommend Cultic. And on that note, I'm going to call this to a draw. Thank you so much if you've been listening this long. Thank you for listening to me ramble. If you have a question, feel free to leave it down in the comments below, but please phrase it in the form of a question because I'm not just going to read your thoughts out loud. New video, making pretty steady progress on it, so look forward to that in the coming days. Before the end of the month, hopefully... Oh shit, February doesn't have a 30th. All right, I'll try to get this out before the end of the month. Might be on the 1st, but... yeah. Anyway, have fun. Bye.